Well, as always, it takes me forever to finally get to a topic. We are going to look at backlocks. There's a lot of them. We're going to look at backlocks and see, are they still a viable locking system? And what do some of the new ones have to offer that maybe some of the older ones don't? So let's go ahead and take a look at it. But first, you guys know, here comes that logo. As you guys know, there are a ton of locking mechanisms on the market. Some of my favorites have always been frame locks, but I have to say backlocks were the first knives I ever owned. So what we're going to do is I've broken these up into a couple of different categories. We're going to look at some different types of locking mechanisms. There's going to be about 5 different types total. So let's go ahead and get everything out of the way, and we're going to look at these ones first, rocker locks. So this is probably the first type of backlock that anyone ever saw coming up through the years, especially if you are my age. Lock back knives, until just here, maybe 10 years ago or so, these were the primary lock you would see. Now, I do know these are 2 different types. This is a standard rocker lock, and this is a triad lock, but they work almost the same way. They are a very strong ambidextrous lock. They're really robust. The triad lock is probably the strongest lock on the market, in my opinion. I think that they work great. They're really simple and they're really sound. I've never had a lockback or a rocker lock fail on me. So how do they work? Well, it's pretty simple. This piece right here is under spring tension. There's a pivot point right here. As a matter of fact, you can see the pivot point right there. You can see the pin that pivots across. You put a little pressure down here and it lifts that piece up. What have you got going on? Well, there's a flat cam, just like a slip joint. When you start to lift, it's going to cam that up and out of the way. It's got a little key cut in it, like a little square, and it matches that cutout that you see right there in that blade. When it comes up and gets to a point, it drops down in, and now that little key is locked in just like this. And now your blade won't close until you push down here, and with that rocker, lift that up. So basically what you've got is the same thing here, except in the triad lock, they've added this pin that accepts all of the stresses. So this lock will over time lose a little bit of its marriage. You can see, even though this is a fairly new knife, there has been some deformation to that lock arm that is on that spring. So this takes some of that out of the equation. A lot of that force is accepted here. But I mean, basically it still works the same. You can see it's got the same cutout in the blade. You can see the key there. It's going to drop down into that groove, and you've got a very stable lock to prevent that knife from coming close in your hands. Backlocks, the rocker locks, have been some of my favorite knives for a very, very long time. There is no reason to think that this is not still a viable knife design, but what they've done is they've come up with some newer ones that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is going to be the ring lock. Now, I mean, this is very, very similar to the knives we just looked at before. This is under a bit of spring tension. There's a high point here. This thing ratchets around. You can see there's a hole right there. When this comes around, there's a high spot, and you'll see it right there. That little lip right there is going to lift up and then drop into that slot. And you basically have to lift up on the ring to remove the tension off of it, and then you can start to close the knife. It is very similar to these. These are just a newer version of it. I probably should have done this one first, because this is definitely the older version of a backlock, but these are really stable as well. I like this knife a lot. For an $8 knife, I am incredibly impressed at how it has performed. The lock is very strong. I don't feel any play in that. And you basically have a locking knife with minimal parts. There's a lot less moving parts to this than there is to this. Taking one of these apart or a triad lock is a pain. This is simply just a piece of metal that has been pushed down, riveted on. It's under a bit of spring tension, and by lifting up, by pulling back on that, you release the tension and allow it to drop. In a very primitive format, you have a very strong locking knife. Cold Steel has always prided themselves on their knives. I would not doubt the robustness of their backlock here with this ring lock. I will say it does have a couple of minor downsides. You have to have something here to use which that ring winds up being. That can be kind of a pain. These have a tendency to break off. So I've seen several people say that theirs broke. I think that's because they were using the lock improperly. They might have been pulling up or pulling back instead of just pulling straight like that. That's what you're trying to do, is that right there. So you're pulling straight. So very good, very primitive lock that's been around for a very, very long time. So there you go. There's number 2, the ring lock. And now we're going to get started into some of the more modern back locks. So as we start moving into these more modern back locks, you're going to notice something. There's some knives on here that you don't typically think of as back locks, but they truly are. This is the Spyderco compression lock. And I say it's back lock because you manipulate it from the back, from the spine of the knife. This is a very viable, very good locking system. So basically what you have is a safe locking system where you can close that knife without ever once getting your hand in the travel of that blade. It allows you a really good action on most knives. I prefer a thumb stud. I don't think this is a great locking mechanism for a flipper. But basically what you have is the equivalent of a frame lock or liner lock that's now on the back. Now that's very simplistic view of it, because if you were to look at the way this frame lock works, you have a flat surface here that's in direct alignment here with the lock. So your lock is here. So you could possibly with force overcome that spring and get that to come, and it would just slip out of the way. What you have with this is your actual lock face is here. And so it's at a 90-degree angle to the lock. So if you look, that lock drops in and slides over. Instead of being straight here where you could slip that lock, you cannot. The only way you're going to get this lock to fail with the depth of that cut and kind of the curvature that you're at is to shear that entire piece off of that compression lock, which makes it a very robust lock. It is one of the strongest locks on the market. And it also allows you a level of comfort because there's nothing here and there's nothing here. You pretty much have even flat scale or handle material all the way down, except for the little cutout here where you put your finger in, which is in an area where typically you don't have a lot of contact. So comfortable, strong, robust. I do say though, I don't like it on a flipper, because if you watch, this is my one thing with this Southern Design knife here. When you flip it, if you pull your finger off really fast, it doesn't happen. But a lot of us have a tendency to ride that in. Now watch when I pull my finger out. It would possibly, if there was enough grit and grime and stuff in there with this being on a flipper, that it would only partially lock. And then even if you moved your finger off, there might not be enough spring tension to fully deploy the lock. The only issue I have with this knife is that it is a flipper. If this had thumb studs, I think it would be much, much better. But as far as the lock, you cannot go wrong with a compression lock from Spyderco. So there, I said good things about Spyderco today. So get off my case about it. So let's go ahead and look at the next one, next one is going to be the Benchmade Axis lock. Now, Benchmade designed this lock. They patented it. It actually is in a lot of knives these days called the sliding bar lock, because Axis lock technically is a patented term, but they lost their patent on it. It's expired. So a lot of people are using it. And it is simply that. It is a bar that slides across. It's a bar that goes across here and slides into a gap on this. And so you can see here, there's a big flat area that goes into, that this locks on, bang, slams into, and now you've got a pretty stable lock. This is another one of those locks that is very ambidextrous and safe. So you can actually use this to deploy the knife. You can relieve the tension off of that and deploy it, and then lock it back up and never once touch the thumb studs. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's not a back lock. When the whole nomenclature of me calling something a back lock is where the lock is located. If it is on the spine side of the pivot, technically it's a back lock. And this is very similar to the next group we're going to talk about. So basically you just have a bar that's under spring tension. There's a couple springs here. You can see them. They call them omega springs. It is under some spring tension. When you pull back on it, it releases the lock from the lock face. There you go. You can see that area there. And then it drops down into a little cammed area that is not as steep, and it allows you to deploy. So this is a good lock. It's a pretty strong lock. The problem I always have with Axis locks is there's always a little bit of blade play with these, and they do have a tendency for these springs here, since they're very, very thin springs, they're not like a strong, robust, solid spring. There's a chance for them to break. And a lot of times what happens is people will not grab both sides and they'll only get one. And so that amount of tension on one side versus the other, a lot of times you'll break one spring versus the other. So the proper way to do it is to pinch it like that. But it is a very good lock. It's a very safe lock. It's another one of those ones, like I said, keeps you out of the travel of the blade. And it's ambidextrous. As you can see, Benchmade has provided you right or left pocket clip holes. So there you go. The Benchmade style access lock, sliding bar lock, whichever you want to call it. And you're going to notice that the next two locks are really, really similar to that. Before anyone gets upset, I do know that these are different locks, but in theory, they work almost the same. So basically, you have a lock face here. You have a pin that takes up and locks in as a stop position, and you're releasing this lock by pulling this back and camming it up and over that lock face, which, like I said, is very, very similar to what we saw in the access lock or sliding bar lock. So you can do the same things with this, the fidgety fun things you can do with that. You can do with the shark lock. This is the ATLUS lock that's on this cold steel Engage. And it is really similar. It has two stop pins in there, but if you look, you have a lock face here, you have a spot for a stop pin there, they lock in together. Those two stop pins absorb all that tension and force, but in practice, they are very similar. You can see there's your lock face, this is your lock bar. They work really, really similarly to each other and to the sliding bar lock. It's just done in a different fashion. So these are some of the newer ones. This shark lock is incredibly robust. This is supposed to be even stronger from what I understand from cold steel, but I had someone tell me that this lock will fail the pommel strike, which means that if you slam this down on the pommel, it disengage the lock, and then, you know, because this one does not have a big, long lock face. That is the one thing I will say about this. Look at how much travel you could have on this, and also on the sliding bar or access lock. It takes a good bit of travel to pull that back and disengage it. This one, really not so much. The amount of travel it takes is a lot less. So I could see that being an issue, but the fact is, I'm not gonna pummel strike anything. These are really good, also very ambidextrous style knives. They are style locks. They are very comfortable to operate. They are a lot of fun. They do have some of their own issues. This one, I have a tendency, if I get up on it and get on that jimping, I can partially disengage the lock, and then I get a little blade play. But like I said in the video I did about this knife, I've never had it completely disengage. So there you go. Back locks, are they still a viable solution to locking your knives? I think so, because there's so many different variants and varieties and things like that. So let's turn this around, do some final thoughts, and send you out about your day. So there you go, guys, back locks. I believe that they are still some of the best locks on the market. As a matter of fact, if I had to pick a lock that would be my favorite lock of all time, it would have to be a standard rocker lock, like what you see on the Spyderco Police. It's really good. It's ambidextrous. They're always good and solid. Do they have their issues? Yes, but they don't give you any of the ergo issues that you get with some of the other locks and some of the problems you get with them. So there you go. But you guys can make your own decisions. Guys, if you like the videos, give them a thumbs up. If you don't like them, give them a thumbs down. But please try to tell me why. I can't change the content if you don't tell me what you don't like. If you want to support the channel, it's as simple as like, share, subscribe, drop a comment, hit the bell icon. If you do hit the bell icon, make sure you've got it set to all. And make sure you've got notifications turned on your device, or you will not get notified of everything I do every day. If you want to support the channel financially, however, there's a handful of ways you can do it. I have a ton of affiliate links down below. It's like self-sponsorship. Anything you purchase with those affiliate links, I get a little bit of it at checkout, and you guys don't pay anything extra. It's just a way for those companies to support me. I do have some that have a discount for you guys. Dollstrong Knives sent me some of the best stones I've had in a very long time. They offer 10% with my affiliate link, 10% off your order. Coffee Brand Coffee, which is the coffee I drink here in the shop, 5% off your order. Right now, ATLUS VPN is running a holiday sale that is up to 80% off your 2-year subscription. So 2 years for $44 on the VPN that I use here at the house. It's great. It allows us to watch stuff on Japanese TV. And the final one is Airfare Consolidator, 3% off your domestic airfare. Other ways you can do it, however, I have a tier-based membership. Everyone has access to my Gilded server. It's just like Discord, except it's on a different format, just a different name. Baseline and premium tier members have access or are automatically entered into a giveaway that I do on the Gilded server about monthly. And the premium guys have access to sharpening tutorial series here on YouTube. And the final way is I have a merchandise store on Ember Shirt Care where you can pick up my merchandise, other creators' merchandise at a discount for 10% off if you use the coupon code CrazySharp, capital C, capital S, all one word. CrazySharp saves you 10% at checkout at Ember Shirt Co. So guys, that's it. I love y'all. Keep it clean in the comment section. If it's your birthday, happy birthday. And I will see you in the next video.